My parents locked eyes with me and coldly said, "We wish you had never been born." The sting of those words cut deeper than any blade could. My chest burned, but I refused to crumble. I lifted my chin, looked straight at them, and replied, "If that's what you truly want, then from this moment forward, consider me gone. As if I never existed." With that, I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing like thunder in the silent room. 30 minutes later, chaos broke out. At the party, my phone flashed with 36 missed calls, all from the very people who had just erased me from their lives. My name is Ryder Blaze, and this is the story of how I was shattered, erased, and reborn from the ashes. I'm about to share something close to my heart. Before I dive in, could you greet me in the comments? Or let me know where you're from. It means the world to see how far my story reaches, because it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Thank you. Now, let me take you back and tell you everything. If what I share resonates with you, please consider subscribing to my channel. Sometimes, all a person needs is to know someone out there cares. Your support allows me to keep telling these stories. That morning, I woke before the sun rose, staring out the window of my small South Loop apartment. At the Chicago skyline, glowing faintly in the dawn. The city was alive, its steel and glass catching the early light. Today was supposed to be my moment. The day when years of sleepless nights, endless office hours, and sacrifices that nearly broke me finally meant something. I told myself not to think about money, not to think about the bills I'd paid for others, not to let anything overshadow the pride of earning my MBA graduation. As I reached for the shower, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Read, remember, Avery sits in the middle. Your guests can take the side table." 10 seconds later, another from my father. "Don't brag about that $1 million project. It makes you sound arrogant." I stared at the screen, the bathroom filling with steam, my chest tightening. Even on my day, the spotlight belonged to someone else. In the kitchen, Elliot was waiting, leaning against the counter with 2 steaming coffees. He flashed the confident grin he'd carried since high school. "This is your day, Ryder," he said. "Don't let anyone steal it from you." He handed me the cup. I smiled back, but my stomach twisted with unease. On campus, balloons swayed in the warm June air. Professors in dark robes shook hands with graduates, and families roared with pride as names were called. When my turn came, Professor Holt embraced me and whispered, "You're one of the sharpest minds I've taught. Never forget that." At the reception, Colleen slapped my back with a booming laugh. "You saved that deal when no one else could. Tonight, we celebrate." Their pride felt genuine, almost tangible. But then my phone buzzed again. A notification from the restaurant. The deposit had been adjusted, extra tables added. At my family's request. I hadn't approved a thing, yet my card was charged. By late afternoon, I stood on a bridge overlooking the Chicago River, its waters flashing green under the sun. I pulled out my leather journal and scribbled, "I don't want to be used anymore. I want to be seen." Snapping the cover shut, I sighed as my phone vibrated again. This time, from Avery. "We need to talk tonight. It's important." When I got home, I opened the restaurant seating chart. My friends and colleagues, who'd supported me all along, were shoved to the far edge near the kitchen. My parents' side of the family dominated the center. Avery's name was boldly written across the head table, while mine looked like an afterthought, barely visible. For a moment, I considered canceling the entire event. Instead, I opened the voice recorder on my phone. If they dared to humiliate me again, if they tried to erase me in front of everyone, I'd have proof. I pressed record and slid the phone into my pocket. As evening settled, the city glowed in amber light, headlights crawling across Michigan Avenue. I buttoned my suit jacket, stared in the mirror, and whispered, "Tonight, they'll finally see me." Avery's message blinked on my phone screen, a steady pulse like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. The walk across campus stirred memories I'd fought to bury. When I first realized I was invisible. In Neville, Illinois, a quiet suburb, every lawn was trimmed, every house looked the same. But behind the closed doors of my home, the rules were never equal for both children. At 15, I'd won the Illinois State Math Championship. Clutching the medal, its metal warm against my chest. My father barely glanced at it before turning to our neighbor. With a wide grin, "Avery's working on her pre-med essays. She'll be a doctor, the pride of this family." My medal might as well have been plastic. Then came my birthday. Balloons filled the room, a sheet cake on the table. My school friends crowded into our cramped living room. I leaned forward to blow out the candles, until my eyes froze on the icing. "Happy birthday, Avery," in bright red letters across the cake. My name was tucked in the corner, an afterthought. My friends laughed, assuming it was a joke. I forced myself to laugh too, though something in my chest cracked. Elliot, just an awkward boy from math club then. leaned close and whispered, "You don't need their permission to shine." Those words became something I clung to. One summer afternoon, sorting boxes in the garage with Dad, I found a folder labeled, "College Fund, Kids." My hands trembled as I opened it, flipping through pages. Every expense, every withdrawal was marked under Avery's name. Prep classes, lab fees, application consultants. The balance was nearly gone. My name was nowhere. When Mom noticed me holding the file, she yanked it away. "You're the older one," she said briskly. "You'll go into finance, make money quickly. Your sister needs this more." Those words lodged in me like splinters that never came out. That night, I tucked my math medal into a shoebox under the bed, with old notebooks and pencils. It gathered dust while Avery's biology trophies lined the mantel. At family dinners, every conversation circled back to her. I faded into a background character in my own home. Years later, I learned the college fund was meant for both of us, but it had been drained before I could apply. That's why I worked shifts in a coffee shop, filled out scholarships late into the night, lived on ramen while Avery's tuition was paid without hesitation. Aunt Janet pulled me aside one day, her voice low. "Don't tell your mother I said this. But they chose your path long ago." She squeezed my shoulder and walked away, leaving me with a truth I wasn't ready to accept. My life had been mapped without my consent. A road where I'd always give, and Avery would always receive. I chose economics because it was fast, efficient, practical. Graduate early, find work, get my own place, stop being a burden. That was the plan. In Urbana-Champaign, I learned to live small. A mattress on the floor, a desk salvaged from curbside, a calendar packed with shifts. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I opened the campus cafe at 5 a.m., breathing in the bitter mix of beans and bleach. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I worked at a law office until midnight, typing case numbers under fluorescent lights that numbed my fingers. Each month, I sent money home for the house. At first, it felt good, like proof I mattered. Then it became expected, then required, then invisible. With my first paycheck, I bought Mom a soft gray scarf she'd admired in a catalog. I wrapped it carefully, included a note promising I'd do more. That night, Dad texted. "This month, Avery needs a new anatomy set. Can you transfer a bit extra?" No mention of the scarf. No mention of me. I sent the money anyway. Standing in the cold at the bus stop, watching my breath drift into the night. The requests kept coming, always urgent, always last minute. "They won't release her lab slot unless we pay today. A surprise fee for clinical hours. The utility bill posted late." I became skilled at shifting money between accounts, like sand slipping through fingers. Each time I swore it'd be the last emergency, another arrived. Avery and I carved out a narrow space of connection. In the storm of family demands. She'd call late, exhausted from labs, grateful as she told me about a professor who remembered her name, or a patient who made her cry in the best and worst way. She never asked for money directly, it always came from Mom or Dad, letting me pretend we were on the same side. My sacrifices were an investment in her future, our future. That one day it'd all be seen and counted. Elliot became my checkpoint. He'd spot me behind the espresso machine after a double shift, and slide a sandwich across the counter. "You're burning from the inside, man," he'd say. I'd reply, "I'm fine," repeating it until it sounded almost true. Alone in my small room, the heater ticking, I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed a title I didn't want to face. Ledger, Family. I listed every transfer, every bill, every missed deadline I saved. The numbers stacked up like a confession. I kept the file synced to my phone. A hidden accounting of love no one else cared to balance. The summer before senior year, the calls became alarms. Avery's tuition loan hit a snag hours before the deadline. Mom's voice shook through the phone. "They need a guarantor for a few weeks until Dad's paperwork clears." From a library computer, heart pounding, I signed the guarantee, convincing myself it was temporary. Months later, a bank officer called to confirm the extension of that same guarantee on a restructured loan. My name was bold on the contract. I lay on my back afterward, staring at the ceiling fan blades until they blurred. It was supposed to be temporary. They'd promised it'd be removed. That night, Avery texted, "I thought they took your name off." "I'm sorry." I believed her. I didn't want a villain. I wanted a family that kept its word. After graduation, I landed a junior analyst job in Chicago. Squeezed into an apartment barely big enough to turn around in, and tried to remember how to breathe again. The city gave me edges I could lean on. I worked. I rose. I made myself useful in rooms that noticed. The money home continued, it always did. When the company promoted me into strategy, I saw a path up. I called home to share the news. Mom asked about Avery's board prep. Dad asked when I could front the exam fees. "We'll settle later." later never came. The scarf I bought for Mom showed up in a family photo. On the mantel behind a yacht at Thanksgiving. Not on her shoulders, but tucked under a crystal vase. A prop, a piece of set dressing. I looked for meaning where there wasn't any. Just a scarf, I told myself. Just money. Just the role you play. Until they realize you're more than the role. By the time I applied to the MBA program, I'd learned the language of crisis. I negotiated vendor contracts by day. And negotiated with my own blood by night. When I got in, I paid the deposit with a laugh that sounded like a cough. I packed my life into 3 boxes, told myself the degree would change the math, and moved to the South Loop. On the morning of commencement, Mom sent a calendar invitation, celebration dinner planning. It slid onto my screen with the cold efficiency of office software. The seating plan was already decided. Main table centered for Avery and the maternal side. Overflow table for my colleagues near the service hall. We've arranged a seat of honor for your sister, Mom wrote, as if I'd asked. I stared at the invitation, then at the ledger, family, file. Glowing on my dock for a long minute. I did nothing. Then I closed the laptop and knotted my tie. If they pushed me too far tonight, I needed to know what I'd do. When I finally ran out of edges. The restaurant in the Loop looked like a postcard. From a life I thought I wanted. Warm light, low jazz, crystal stemware catching the room's breath. Elliot walked beside me, bumping my shoulder on purpose. The way he does when he senses I'm drifting. Professor Holt arrived in a navy dress and hugged me with both arms. Colleen waved from afar, her grin bright enough to clear a path. For a brief second, the evening felt clean. Then my parents appeared with the practiced smile of hosts. Who knew the script? They hugged me softly and pivoted hard, sweeping Avery forward like a centerpiece. This is our Avery, Mom said to Professor Holt. She saves lives. Dad shook Colleen's hand and asked what it was like. To work with someone who sits at a desk all day. I swallowed the taste of metal. I glanced at the floor diagram Mom had placed on the stand. The central table glowed under a ring of pendant lights. Avery's nameplate sat in the middle beside my mother's, surrounded by a half-moon of relatives. My name was printed at a side table near the kitchen door, the one that breathed steam and clatter each time it swung. My friends, who'd fought for and with me, were assigned there too. When we took our seats, a colleague I admired asked my parents if they were proud. Mom smiled. Avery, well, she saves people. Colleen lifted her glass to speak about the deal I'd rescued in spring. How it saved a company from collapsing, 1,000 families' jobs. Dad cut in politely, that's his job. It's not thesis level. The table absorbed the judgment like a spill. I kept breathing, told myself to remember the river, the journal. The promise I'd made to myself hours earlier. Elliot pressed his hand to my shoulder under the table. Not your fault, he whispered. Behind us, Aunt Janet murmured to her husband. Ryder has money but no soul. I didn't turn around. I fixed my eyes on the candle, watching the flame tremble. On my way back from the restroom, I passed Avery, turned slightly away, speaking to a friend from her residency. Her voice was hushed and hoarse. If Ryder hadn't paid, I'd have crashed a long time ago. But they'll never say that out loud. The truth hit me like a third person in the room. She saw me, flinched, and looked down. I nodded and kept walking. I wanted to tell her I understood. But understanding didn't make the weight lighter. Back at the table, my phone buzzed. A coworker had tagged me in a story. I tapped it open and saw the glowing center table. Captioned, "The doctor's family is the star tonight." The camera panned across faces I knew from childhood, cutting away just before it reached mine. I watched it twice. The second time hurt more. An email banner slid across my screen from the restaurant. Updated invoice. I opened it without thinking. The total stared at me, charged to my card on file. My name in the line that mattered. I scrolled to the note. Thank you for hosting this celebration. Congratulations to Dr. Avery. My parents' laughter floated across the room, as they told a cousin they'd put this evening together, for our Avery. Who makes us proud? I felt something click into place, not anger, but a steady lock. I raised my glass and clinked it softly with my spoon. The room didn't quiet at first. Then it did. Voices falling like coins into a well. Colleen looked at me. Professor Holt folded her hands. Elliot watched my face, the way you watch a friend on a cliff. I stood, shoulders squared, the murmur thinning into a hush. I could feel the jazz fading, the candlelight pulling at the glass. The kitchen door swinging open and shut in a rhythm I'd known my whole life. I filled my lungs and held the room in the space of a breath, ready to stop pretending I wasn't there. The room clicked into stillness as my spoon kissed the rim of my glass. I felt heat in my throat and let it steady into words. If I'm just a wallet, I said, my voice shaking for the first few syllables before it found bone. Then I've paid the bills, the tuition, the hospital. For a breath, no one moved. The jazz stuttered and went quiet. Someone set a fork down, it sounded like a gavel. I kept going, because I'd carried this ledger in my head for 10 years. I paid the power when the lights flickered. I covered late fees when notices came in red. I guaranteed loans I was told were temporary. Loans that somehow never let me go. Every month, I sent money home so you could breathe. Murmurs rustled around the table, a ripple of fabric in a room too warm. Dad's face colored to the shade of a warning light. "You ungrateful child," he said, louder than needed. "We wish we'd never given birth to such a disrespectful son." The sentence hit like a door slamming in a quiet house. I stared at the candle, watching the flame bend and stand back up. I swallowed, tasted copper, and scanned the faces. That had seen me grow, get a medal, turn into a man. Who paid for the cake and still didn't get a slice? "If that's what you wish," I said, my voice calm, surprising me, "then consider me gone, as if I never existed." Chairs creaked. A cousin's lips parted. Colleen's eyes went fierce with protective anger I'd never felt from blood. I set my glass down, its base clicking the crystal. I walked away, the hardwood floor giving my steps a beat. I crossed the ring of light, past the maitre d', and pushed through the brass-handled door into the hallway, where it smelled of citrus, ginger, and cold air. Elliot called, catching up, but I lifted a hand without turning. "Let me go alone." He slowed, and in that pause, I felt the clean edge of something ending. The lobby lights flattened the evening into a film still. Outside, the loop hummed. A text flashed before the door closed behind me. "Avery, I'm sorry. I know what you've done. I was afraid to say it." I stood under thinning rain, the valet whistling for a cab, and looked at the message until the screen blurred. I typed nothing back. In the taxi, the city slid by in wet strokes. Red and white reflections smearing across the windshield. My phone buzzed like a trapped insect. Mom, Dad, Aunt Janet, a colleague unsure what to do with the silence I'd left. The driver glanced at me in the mirror, as if he could feel the noise in my pocket. I let it ring. I let it ring. When I reached my building, the river threw back lights in shredded coins. I climbed the stairs to avoid the elevator's torture, unlocked my door, and stepped into the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I set my phone on the counter and faced the window, the city breathing below. The screen lit again, insistent. I picked it up. The number stared back, 36 missed calls. I counted them because counting is what I do. When I need the world to make a shape. 36 attempts to pull me back into the old role. In the span of an hour. 36 times I chose to stay gone. An email pinged, "Thank you for your payment. Congratulations to Dr. Avery." I laughed, a sound without humor that cracked at the end. Even the receipt had learned the family script. I powered the phone down, and the apartment went completely quiet. I kicked off my shoes and walked to the window. The river was a black seam stitched through the city's chest. Somewhere in the restaurant, a candle guttered out. I set my forehead against the glass and said it out loud. To the street, the water, the part of me that still needed permission. Tonight, I'm free, even if it costs me. I stayed there until my breath stopped fogging the window, then crossed the room, shut the hallway door tight, and let the silence hold. Morning arrived like a knock. I didn't want to answer, but I turned the phone back on. Because work would need me. Messages flooded in, as if a dam had cracked before dawn. "Dad, you embarrassed us in front of everyone." "Mom, family comes first, unless you decide you're above it." Cousin's commentary dressed up as concern. "Avery, please don't hate me." The screen pulsed with judgments and pleas in alternating stripes. I put the phone face down and tried to breathe. At the office, the world made sense again. Numbers lined up, plans had outputs. Colleen stepped into my doorway without knocking, leaned on the frame. "You told the truth," she said. "I'm proud of you." The words landed softly where others had bruised. Later, an email from Professor Holt found me between meetings. "Your voice is clear. Keep it that way." It was like being handed clean water after days of salt. By evening, the sky over the river was the color of an old bruise. I was reheating leftover noodles when the intercom buzzed. I pressed the button and heard my mother's voice. "Too composed to be casual, we're here. Let us up." The elevator took forever, and not long enough. When the knock came, it was a quick, practiced rhythm. I hadn't heard at my door in years. Mom stood in front, Aunt Janet beside her, Dad a step back, jaw set. They didn't ask to come in. They assumed. I met them in the doorway and didn't move. "We need to talk," Mom said. "Avery's program has costs. It's your responsibility as the son. To help your sister." The word responsibility hung like a noose. "My responsibility ended," I said, "when you told me I didn't deserve to exist." Fear thinned Aunt Janet's eyes, they dropped to the hallway carpet. Dad's gaze burned past me into the apartment. As if he could appraise square footage and turn it into moral debt. Avery's name lit my phone on the console, a video call. I held the screen up, her face filling it. Red eyes, hospital corridor behind her, fluorescent lights flattening everything. I knew, she said, voice cracking. I knew you were carrying it all. I should have said something. I was scared. If I stepped out of the light, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Her confession didn't absolve anything, it just made the machine clearer. Dad spoke over the call, firm, tired of pretense. We needed someone to handle the finances, and you were born to do that. That's how families work. Don't make this dramatic. The sentence was a key turning in a lock I'd rattled my whole life. I put the phone down, let Avery's image hover face up on the table, and reached for the binder on the shelf by the door. I'd printed the Ledger family file weeks ago. Because a thing on paper feels harder to deny. I opened it to the first page and handed it to Mom. This is 10 years, I said. Rent when you were short, medicine when insurance fought you. Winter gas bills, late fees, 2 rounds of tuition loans. I guaranteed and was told were temporary. You don't have to thank me. But you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. They turned pages in silence. The hallway humming with other people's dinners and televisions. Mom handed the binder back like it was contaminated. That's what an eldest son does, she said, crisp and chilly. It's not a favor, it's duty. I felt anger rise and pass, like a fever breaking. No, I said. It was love. And you kept calling it duty so you wouldn't have to love me back. I stepped into the doorway, making the space smaller. From now on, you'll figure it out without me. I'm not the family's wallet. Aunt Janet's mouth trembled, but she didn't speak. Dad squared his shoulders, the old posture of final authority. But there was nothing left to talk a man into. The elevator chimed at the end of the hall. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Mom started to say my name, the way she did when I was 8. And late for dinner. I nodded once, not at her, but at the past. I hope you find a way, I said. I hope Avery finds her own balance and her own voice. But I'm done. I eased the door inward until the frame touched their shoes. Take care of yourselves. I closed the door. The latch caught, small and decisive. For a moment, I stood with my palm flat to the wood, feeling the vibration of the hallway on the other side. Knuckles hit the door in a rapid burst. The old list of names returned through the barrier. Selfish, ungrateful, dramatic, like ghosts. Who hadn't learned there was no house left to haunt? I slid down, my back to the door, the world sealed off. Tears came without heat, no anger, just evacuation. I let them. My breath slowed. The knocking thinned, faded, then moved down the hall. Their voices dissolved into elevator cables. And the hum of the building. In the quiet, I heard the river, low and constant. The city's pulse that didn't care about family scripts. I stood, wiped my face with my sweatshirt sleeve, and looked around the little room that had held me. Through late nights and early mornings. The scarf under the vase in the old photo flickered across my mind. Then drifted away for good. I powered the phone down again. And set it on the table beside the closed binder. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. The door behind me was just wood, paint, and hinges. But it felt like a line drawn in wet concrete. On my side of it, air, enough to live. After closing the door on my parents that night, I buried myself in work. Arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for projects. That scared others off. My mind was raw from the confrontation, but I poured every sharp edge into strategy decks and negotiations. Within months, I was leading a multinational project that had been teetering on collapse. Colleen introduced me in meetings as if I were already a partner. My colleagues began to see me differently. Not as the quiet analyst who stayed late, but as someone who carried momentum. One morning, as the first sun touched the loop, I opened an email from Professor Holt. She'd heard of the deal I'd steered to safety. Her words were simple. You are living proof that intelligence and grit don't need outside permission to matter. I read it 3 times, each line pressing into me, like a hand steadying my back. That afternoon, I sat at my desk, hands trembling over the keyboard, and wrote what I'd never dared say out loud. On LinkedIn, under an anonymous profile, I described what it meant to be the invisible child. To be the wallet for a family that never said thank you. To be told I wasn't worth the space I took up on my own graduation night. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. I ended with one line from the marrow of my bones. Silence and success are the sweetest revenge. I hit post and shut the laptop, convinced nothing would come of it. By evening, the numbers had gone feral. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. I was the invisible one too. You put into words what I've carried for years. I scrolled until my eyes blurred, realizing I wasn't an island. I was part of an archipelago of children who'd been overlooked, underestimated, erased. For the first time, their voices wrapped around mine. The following week, Colleen walked into my office, smile fierce. "You're going to speak at the Resiliency Business Conference. They want your story." I froze, breath lodged in my chest. On stage, under a canopy of lights, I told the truth without naming names. About resilience, carrying a weight no one acknowledged. Finding freedom when you stop waiting for permission to exist. The applause rose like a wave and broke over me. I walked off stage lighter than I'd been in years. I moved into a new apartment that fall. A penthouse, floor-to-ceiling glass. Lake Michigan stretching endless outside my window. The first night, Elliot and Colleen stood with me on the balcony, raising glasses of cheap champagne, laughing at the absurdity of the view. "Family," Elliot said, clinking his glass against mine. I nodded, throat tight. It wasn't blood, it was better. News of my success spread quickly. Old neighbors whispered to my parents. Cousins forwarded articles. The emails started to arrive. First scolding, "You've abandoned us. You only care about yourself." Then shifting to pleading, "Avery needs help. Don't turn your back." I read them in silence. My reply was steady as stone, nothing at all. Late one night, Avery's name lit my screen. A confession folded into regret. "I'm sorry. I knew how much you carried. I wasn't brave enough to say it. I hope someday you can forgive me." I let the phone rest in my palm, then set it face down. Some words can't fix what years have carved. I stood at the window, Chicago glowing beneath me. The lake breathing its dark rhythm. "Now I live for myself," I whispered to the glass. "Nothing can drag me back." The city met me with silence. And for the first time, silence felt like an embrace. By midsummer, I hosted a dinner in my penthouse. Nothing like the rigid meals of my past. No seating charts, no relatives fighting to be seen. Just pizza boxes scattered across the marble counter. Bottles of wine breathing open. And the people who'd chosen to be in my life. Elliot stretched lazily across the sofa, retelling our awkward math club memories with such flair that the room erupted with laughter. Colleen leaned back, her laughter deep and unguarded, her eyes shining with warmth. Professor Holt raised her glass, her voice even and certain. "Ryder, you've redefined what resilience looks like in this field." My face flushed in a way I'd never felt around my own family. I stood, words rising naturally. "Once, the people closest to me made me feel like I wasn't worth existing," I said. "But what I've learned is this. Worth isn't dictated by blood or the role someone forces you into. Real family is found in those who stand beside you. Not because they must, but because they choose to." The applause that followed filled the room. Not the hollow clapping of obligation, but the rhythm of genuine affection. Elliot crossed the floor and pulled me into a hug so tight. It made me laugh. "You deserve this, man. Every last bit of it." Later, as the night rolled on, I noticed my phone lighting up. 5 missed calls from Mom, stacked one after another. I turned it face down without hesitation, without guilt. The table around me buzzed on, untouched by the weight I'd once carried. Hours later, as laughter still echoed, I opened an email from Aunt Janet. Her words were simple yet firm. "You've earned happiness. Don't let them drag you back. I'm proud of you." Tears came before I could hold them back. Maybe not every thread of family was poisoned. Maybe a single strand of grace could still run through it. Online, the anonymous post I'd made had ignited something bigger. The phrase, "invisible no more," swept across timelines and cities. Messages from strangers poured in. Thank yous, confessions, vows to break free from their own cycles. It hit me that the story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to anyone who'd been diminished. And still found the courage to rise. When the last guest left and the apartment fell quiet, I stood at the window. The city shimmered alive. Streets glowing, the river slicing silver between towers. I opened my journal for one last entry. Ryder Blaze, free man, turning the page to a new beginning. I shut it, placed the ledger, family, in a drawer, and locked it away. The past had been balanced, the debt settled. Leaning against the glass, I whispered into the stillness. If you've ever been told you don't matter, remember, you do. Release the chains, build the family you choose. And step into the freedom that waits for you. The room stayed quiet, but Chicago's lights pulsed bright and endless. As though answering,